Hello, it's Alex, the Bookubus. Today I'm going to be sharing with you my January reading wrap-up. So kicking off the new year with a pretty good reading month, so that was great. And I read 10 books in January, which is a lot for me. Normally it's probably like half that. But a lot of them were short books, so that explains that. And I read mostly horror as usual, and a few YA books thrown in, I think one middle grade, and yeah, I guess one of them is probably more like horror adjacent rather than strictly horror. Anyway, let's talk about the actual books. And I had one 5-star read this month, so I figured let's kick it off with that because I'm just so excited about it. It is Stitch by Mark Morris. This originally came out in the 1990s under the Ibis line, like Cappy Coja's The Cipher and other such amazing books. And I had read another Mark Morris novel last year, Toadie, which was a really excellent coming-of-age story. I read that as a buddy read with the lovely Kelsey over at Slime and Slashers. We both loved it. It ended up being one of my favourites of the year. And yeah, we both really wanted to read more by this author. So we did. And we jumped on it in January because we just needed more Mark Morris in our lives. And this one just, yeah, did not disappoint. This one I gave 5 stars to. It was just hands down a phenomenal read. He is such a talented author. There are a lot of characters in this one, but they're all so distinct that you never get confused as to who is who throughout the story. And this one is about 500 or so pages long. So it is, you know, fairly lengthy, but it was just so engrossing and captivating that, yeah, it was just such a page turner. So what is it about? Getting ahead of myself. This is set at a university in England. A lot of the characters are students, some of whom are just starting at the university this academic year, and some have been there for longer. And yeah, there are other characters as well. And the character of Stitch is someone that, yeah, crops up early in the story, and it's really hard to explain it, and I don't want to get into like big spoilers. But basically, one of these students meets Stitch, or Stitch meets him, and this student is transformed. He is now like confident and charismatic, and he starts a club at the university in the UK. You have various like groups and clubs that you can join at university, and so this guy starts his, and basically it's a cult and he is very much their leader. And we see how some students join this group and become immediately sucked into it, but not everyone is. And so yeah, we're following a couple of other students who feel like something is very off here, and they are trying to figure out exactly what's going on, even though what they have seen seems too weird to be real. And yeah, I don't know if I want to say much more about the plot, but wow, this was just such a fantastic read. It is dark. It definitely does go to some really dark places, and I don't just mean some like gory stuff and, you know, that kind of thing, although there is some of that. But in particular, there is a scene of a child who is sexually assaulted, and it is rough to read. It was upsetting to read, honestly. And if that's something you would want to avoid, then yeah, I would say to skip this one. It does play a role in the story overall, but yeah, just wanted to give a heads up on that. But yeah, the details and the descriptions in Stitch were just absolutely brilliant. And yeah, I loved the characters. There are some, you know, that we get to know a bit more than others. and you really do become invested in them. And yeah, I had no idea how the story was going to play out. Things do like escalate and they come to a climax that, yeah, ended up being, yeah, such a fantastic scene to read. And yeah, I just can't say enough good things about this one. And I know Kelsey loved it too, so I'm sure she will be talking about it on her channel if she hasn't already. But yeah, we are both like big Mark Morris fans already. We already are wanting to read more. I need to, yeah, buy some more of his work. And that reminds me, there's a really wonderful author photo in here. Hello. Sorry about the glare, but yeah, anyway, brilliant. Love a good author photo. So if that sounds interesting to you, then I highly recommend picking this one up. This was my favourite book of the month, Stitch by Mark Morris. Okay, the rest of the books I'll just talk about in the order that I read them. So the first book that I actually read in January was Blood on Satan's Claw by Robert Wynne-Simmons, and this is based on the film of the same name. The screenplay was written by the author of this book, and I love Blood on Satan's Claw. It's one of my favourite 70s horror films. It is a folk horror film, and yeah, one of that kind of original like folk horror trifecta of Witchfinder General, Blood on Satan's Claw and Wicker Man, and for good reason. I think it's an absolutely fantastic film, and I had heard that they were putting out basically a novelisation of the film written by the writer of the screenplay, and I was like, I need that in my life. So I was very happy to receive this as a gift from my husband for Christmas. And yeah, I read it first thing in January because I was just so excited to read it, and it was great. I rated this one 4 stars. So this one is set in, yeah, a small village in the UK, and something is turned up in a field that is being ploughed. It's a skull, and there's something strange about it. And once this skull has been turned up, things start happening in the village. Some people start to, yeah, exhibit some strange behaviour, and there are a group of children and teenagers that, yeah, are starting to kind of form a bit of a group and do some strange things as well. So yeah, this was a really wonderful adaptation of the film. I was nervous that it wasn't going to be very good, I guess, basically. So I was excited to read it, but I was kind of like keeping my expectations low. But I was really pleasantly surprised. The writing is really wonderful, some really great descriptions, and there was a really great, you know, unsettling tone and atmosphere to the whole thing. And even though I knew the story, it was still really wonderful to read this and just see everything play out. And the physical book of this is really nice. It's yeah, just really well put together. It's even got like a ribbon in it to hold your place, and it's got lovely end papers, if I can open the flap there. So yeah, and there are a few illustrations throughout the book. Yeah, so lots of really cool illustrations throughout as well, which is a really nice detail. So if you are a fan of the film, then I definitely recommend picking up the book. If you haven't seen the film but you like folk horror, then I definitely recommend picking up the book and watching the film. Yeah, Blood on Satan's Claw, it's fantastic, and yeah, this was a really great book. I gave it 4 stars. Next up, I had another trip to the 90s with another Del Ibis book. This is Grave Markings by Michael A. Arnzen. This is one I've had sitting on my shelf for quite a while and had been meaning to get to it, but you know how it is. But I made a point of picking it up, and yeah, this was really good too. This was another 4-star read for me. So this one is about a tattooist who is somewhat unhinged and decides that he needs to do something extreme in order to get his artistic skills noticed. And he ends up tattooing someone like over their entire body, and this body is then found dead. And things go from there. So basically more people die and are tattooed with his interesting brand of tattooing. So we hear from this character throughout the story, and yeah, we kind of get inside his mind and some things that may have made him who he is today. We are also following another character who is a journalist, and he hears about this story when this first body turns up, and so he ends up being like the main character of the story, and we're following him as he is trying to investigate what happens. He's also kind of investigating like tattooing in general, because he's never had a tattoo before, and so he is kind of like delving into that world and trying to figure out, you know, what would make someone get a tattoo in the first place, and just, you know, about the scene, the tattooing scene in general, and what it means to people, trying to figure out who this killer is. So I will say this one didn't grab me immediately. It did take me a little bit to get into it, but once I did, once it kind of found its footing and got going, I really enjoyed it. And while this one does have, some dark elements and some gruesome depictions of certain things happening, I felt like this was a bit more of a like fun read than Stitch was. Stitch was, just felt like more of a serious read. So overall, I did enjoy this one. It was entertaining and quite an interesting and unique storyline, and I gave this one 4 stars. Next up are the books that I read for Scary Sleepover weekend, which was a lot of fun, and thank you to everyone who joined in. I had such a good time, and I ended up reading 3 books for that. So first up, I read Someone at the Door by Richie Tankersley Cusick. This is about 2 sisters who are trapped in their home due to a snowstorm. It's just the 2 of them, their parents are away, and these 2 guys turn up at their doorstep, and one of them is injured, and they feel like they can't really turn them out into the crazy snowstorm out there, so they end up coming into the house and staying with them, but they're pretty suspicious and they don't know if they can trust them. And some strange things start happening, and things get a bit more serious as the story progresses. There is also a crazy ex-boyfriend out there of one of the sisters who just broke up with him, and he did not take it well. And there is also an escaped serial killer who is on the loose out there. So we've got these few different elements, and it's like, who is behind these strange goings on? Can we trust these 2 cute boys who are now in the house with the 2 sisters? So there's definitely a bit of, love interest type things going on, as Richie Tankersley Cusick likes to do. So that was all fun. And I just thought this was great. I really liked the snowy atmosphere and the way that kind of situation, can be so isolating and cut you off from possibilities of escaping or getting help or whatever. And it was just a really good suspenseful story that, kept me turning the pages and needing to know what was going to happen next. So I really enjoyed this one. I thought it was great. I gave it 4 stars. I also read a middle grade book. This is the first book in Christopher Pike's Spooksville series. It's called The Secret Path, and this one is about a young boy who moves to Springville, but the kids in the area who know what the place is really like, they call it Spooksville. And this boy meets a couple of other local kids, and they end up, kind of going on this adventure to find this kind of local legend of a secret path that can take you into like another dimension kind of thing. There's also a witch in the story who, plays quite a role in things, and everything on the cover does happen in the story, believe it or not, because there's kind of a lot going on. And I've read a handful of Christopher Pike's YA novels, and they're a bit hit and miss, but mostly I have enjoyed them. But I wasn't sure what to expect for him writing middle grade, so I went in with low expectations, but I was pleasantly surprised. I thought this was great. It's definitely very quirky. The dialogue and the characters are all kind of wacky, but if you can get on board with it and just go along for the ride, then I think you'll have a good time like I did. So yeah, I just thought this was really fun, very quirky, and if I see any more Spooksville books, I will definitely pick them up. So yeah, this one I rated 4 stars as well. And the third book I read for Scary Sleepover weekend was The Prom, part of the Terror Academy series by Nicholas Pine. And this was a gift from the aforementioned Kelsey at Slime and Slashers. So thank you ever so much, Kelsey, for sending this my way. I really enjoyed it. And this is about a teenage girl who is on the prom committee. She and a group of other people are trying to organise their prom, and we get a flashback at the beginning of the story to 20 years previously, when that year's prom was being held and there was a girl left for dead after something that happened. And since then the school has not held a prom because of that, but this year they decided to bring it back. And the students who are organising this year's prom start getting picked off. So yeah, it's a case of who will be next and who is behind it. And yeah, this one was pretty fun. It definitely had some things that weren't as good, like some of the dialogue was kind of clunky, and I think there was one character who was just fat shamed throughout the entire book basically, which, you know, could have done without. Other than that, it was a fun read. It, yeah, definitely kept me interested throughout the story, and you know, it was somewhat predictable, but it was still enjoyable and I liked the ending. So yeah, I thought this one was a really good time and I gave it 4 stars as well. Okay, next up I read White Ibis by Wendy Dalrymple. I read this for the Eerie Indies book club hosted by Kelly at Kelly Hooked on Books. And this is a novella, so it's a pretty quick read. This is about a female character. She's in her 30s and life just isn't exactly, you know, panning out how she wanted it to be. Her boyfriend, who she thought was the one, you know, things in their relationship aren't going too well, and she's just starting to question, you know, things in her life. And she ends up meeting this other woman at her yoga class, and she is, yeah, drop dead gorgeous, and they end up, yeah, forming a friendship. They meet up regularly, and eventually they end up going away for a weekend together, for like a girls' weekend. But yeah, something happens and yeah, things go from there basically. So yeah, it's hard to say too much about this one because it is such a short read. This one was really good. I will say it did take a while to get going. I feel like the setup, you know, was maybe a bit longer than it needed to be, but yeah, I enjoyed it. I enjoyed the characters and the direction that the story went. Obviously I'm not going to give anything away, but it was, yeah, just an interesting and quick read that I really enjoyed. I gave this one 4 stars, and I would, yeah, definitely keep an eye out for more of this author's work. Next up, I read a short story collection, To Wallow in Ash and Other Sorrows by Sam Richard, and this was kindly sent to me by the author and owner of the publisher Weird Punk Books. I was, yeah, very happy to receive a handful of their publications from last year in exchange for a review. But yeah, as you know, these will be my honest thoughts. I have read, you know, a handful of Weird Punk books in the past and thoroughly enjoyed them, and I've been really wanting to read more of their work. You know, I don't take on many books specifically for review, so you know that it's something that I'm actually really wanting to read. If I do so, I'll read the blurb on the back because it explains the concept of the collection better than I would be able to. It says, these stories are a cross-section of literary splatterpunk, transgressive fiction and weird horror, which explore loss, grief, and the alluring comforts found within the heart of oblivion. So this collection did originally come out a few years previously, and following the death of the author's partner, and all of the stories explore, death of a loved one and grief and, just that whole descent into darkness that process can be. And I thought this was an excellent collection. I think the breadth of kind of using, that concept in very different ways throughout the collection was really fantastic. So there is quite a variety within the stories here. And some of them you could tell were very personal, whereas others, felt less so. But still using that kind of common thread and that experience to, create the story out of. And there were a couple kind of standout favourites for me that were I Know Not the Names of the Gods to Whom I Pray and We Feed This Muddy Creek. I think those were maybe the standouts to me, but I mean, they were all great. I think The Prince of Mars was a really interesting one, really well done in a very Burroughs-esque fashion, and Death Like Love was also great. To Wallow in Ash, the title story, they were all excellent, but those ones I think stood out to me just a little bit more than the rest of them. Overall, I gave this one 4 stars. If grief horror is something you want to read or read more of, then I definitely recommend checking this collection out. Next up, I read Last Days by Brian Evenson. This is one that is hard to categorise, but I've heard people call it horror. I wouldn't class it as that. I think it, maybe horror adjacent. But this is one that I read with my friend Emily and we both enjoyed it. This is one, as another one I've been meaning to pick up for a while, and I was glad to finally do so. So this one is about a guy who ends up getting involved in this cult of amputees. So they purposely amputate parts of their body as, part of their religion, essentially. And the main character here, Klein, becomes involved with them. It's hard to say too much about it because it's not very long, but this is definitely has some noir vibes. It's kind of a detective story. There's definitely something noirish about the whole thing. The other big vibe that this book gives out is of the absurd. So it's very kind of the things that happen here are very absurd and odd, and it's definitely not quite what I was expecting from this book. I think because I'd heard it classed as horror, I was expecting something else, but that's not to say I didn't enjoy it. I think the things I didn't like so much about it was that it is kind of one of those stories that, like, you read a lot of words but not really much has happened, and the way that he writes isn't very descriptive either, so it does feel a bit slow, and it does feel, the story as a whole did feel quite repetitive at times. And another thing is that it's a bit of a frustrating read at times, because the main character, he kind of is in this situation where he's trying to do something, but he kind of is feeling like he's hitting his head against a brick wall each time. And so as the reader, we kind of go through the same thing. It's, it was quite frustrating at times, which, I'm sure was intentional, but just isn't like the most enjoyable reading experience, I guess. But yeah, there was a lot I did enjoy about this. Definitely some of the descriptions really stood out to me, and just some, yeah, certain details that, you know, just like one sentence would be like a really great sentence. But I will say I didn't love this one. You know, I liked it, but I didn't love it. So I ended up giving this one 3.5 stars. And then last up, I squeezed in a point horror book at the end of the month, and I picked up Second Sight by Sinclair Smith. This is about a teenage girl called Grayson who has been blind but has recently had surgery with like a cornea transplant in order to give her vision. But as she's recovering from the surgery and is, you know, getting used to being able to see, she starts having these weird episodes where she's kind of seeing these visions, and she thinks she's basically witnessed a murder. And so, yeah, that leads her down a path of trying to figure out, you know, whose murder did she see and who was the killer, etc. And yeah, this was a pretty good one. I quite enjoyed it. Something that made this one a little different to a lot of the point horror ones is that it's set in New York City, so there are some like New York things going on. At one point she goes to Coney Island and rides the Cyclone and the Wonder Wheel, and I was like, oh, I've done those things too. So that was cool. And it's not set in a school setting either, like a lot of them are. So yeah, because she is visiting the doctor a lot post-surgery, and she's currently staying with her sister in New York City. So yeah, that just kind of set it apart a little bit from some of the other point horror books and, yeah, books of that kind. And this one, yeah, had like your general love interest and your, you know, potential suspects, that kind of thing. And overall, yeah, it was a good, enjoyable story. It also had like some giallo vibes a little bit in the actual, just the story. Like I could see that concept being used in a giallo film, so that was pretty cool. And yeah, so this was a good one. I enjoyed it. I gave it 3.5 stars. So that was everything I read in January. A pretty decent reading month. Yeah, definitely can't complain. A lot of good reads, a lot of great reads. So yeah, do let me know if you've read any of these. I would love to hear what you thought about them, or please let me know what you've been reading recently. If you have any recommendations, I would love to hear about them in the comments below. Thank you ever so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed it, and hopefully I will see you again in my next video. Bye!